I'm Hannah Sullivan, 34, and a month ago I stood in my grandmother's quiet kitchen with a house key in my palm that felt heavier than any diploma I've ever earned. Sunlight ran across the old oak floor, touching the place where she used to set a cooling pie, and something settled in me. Calm, sure, steady. That house on Maple Street had been the only place where no one measured me against my sister or tallied up what I should give. The ink on the will was barely dry when the phone started buzzing, and the same voices that forgot my birthday found me immediately. They said words like family and share as if those words could erase years of being told to wait my turn. I stood at the sink watching a line of sparrows on the fence and realized there would be no gentle conversation about this. There would be a decision, and I would be the one expected to fold. I didn't fold. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments and tap like and subscribe if you've ever had to hold your ground when the people closest to you tried to talk you out of it. I was raised in a small 2-bedroom rental off El Camino, the kind of place where you hear your neighbor's blender in the morning and the train at night, and I learned early that work gets you through more doors than charm. My parents loved the idea of success, mostly as it poured itself around my younger sister Brooke ballet classes' art tutors, a new laptop for creative projects, while I learned to stretch a thrift store calculator and a city bus pass. My grandmother Maggie kept a neat little Victorian on Maple Street with a wraparound porch and roses she'd coax through every season. She let me follow her through the garden beds with a trowel when I was 9 and told me to mind the roots. She never lectured about fairness. She simply showed up at small things at real things, clapping quietly in the back row, while I pinned a robotics ribbon to my jacket, sending a handwritten card when I passed the CPA exam. When I moved into a studio with peeling paint and a view of the alley, she didn't judge. She brought a second-hand lamp and said, "Light is everything." Her house smelled like cinnamon and soap, and it held a kind of listening that didn't exist anywhere else in our family. I built a life out of quiet steps, community college credits stacked at night, a transfer scholarship audit internships, then a spot on a finance team where being early and precise mattered more than being noticed. That work led to a senior accountant role 2 miles from Maple Street, a tiny miracle, in a place where miles turn into an hour the minute traffic gets opinionated. Brooke's world ran on different fuel launch parties' team photos, a promotion she announced with a champagne boomerang, and somehow my parents heard in each new title a promise delivered to them. At family dinners, conversation bent toward her next big thing while I kept refilling the water glasses. When I did speak, there was a nod and a quick return to Brooke's calendar. Maggie's porch swing became the place where I reset, where she'd press a warm mug into my hands and ask, "What's next for you, honey?" as if my next whatever it was actually counted. When she passed the house, came to me with a letter I read 3 times before putting it back in the envelope. "This is not a favor, it's a home." The house is small by the standards of people who hire decorators and host fundraisers, but it feels generous in all the right places: a bright front room with a bay window, the narrow staircase that creaks on the 3rd step, a kitchen just deep enough for a wooden table and 2 chairs. It sits on a block where mornings are quiet and afternoons carry the soft noise of kids riding bikes a world away from my studio's buzzing radiator and the neighbor who practiced drums at midnight. Owning it meant I could walk to work, save what used to disappear into rent, and take on a few consulting clients from a desk by that window. It also meant I'd be living 3 turns from Brooke's office, a coincidence that didn't feel small. I told myself the house would help everyone calm down, 4 walls a deed, a line nobody would cross, because the paper was clear and the choice was mine. The first night I slept there, I left the porch light on the way Maggie used to, and it felt like the house breathed back. The calls started the next morning with a soft voice from my mother asking if we could talk things through, and by evening there were long messages about doing right by the family, and how Brooke's new position required a proper space for entertaining. My father followed with a practical tone about expenses and timing, as if we were discussing a car that needed replacing, and my sister's text landed between them with a half-dozen heart emojis attached to the word share. I let a day pass and answered simply that I was keeping the house. The replies grew firmer, then familiar words that turned heavy when repeated enough times: selfish, unfair, ungrateful. I cleaned the bay window and watered the roses and tried to believe the noise would fade if I didn't feed it, but threats have a way of finding their shape when you ignore them. Late on a Thursday, a message came through that wasn't a suggestion at all, carrying a place, a time, and a promise of what would happen if I didn't show. I put the phone down on the kitchen table and looked at the key again, the one that had felt so heavy and so right. The next move wasn't going to be a conversation on a porch. It was going to be a performance in a conference room, and they expected me to play the easy part. The meeting was set for Friday afternoon in Claire Benton's office downtown. The tone of my father's last message had left no room for interpretation. You will attend, or we will move forward without you. I parked 2 blocks away and sat in the car long enough to watch the clock hit 2. My hands stayed still on the steering wheel, cold even in the mild spring air. When I finally stepped out, the sound of traffic felt distant, as if the world outside that office had no idea what was waiting for me inside. Claire's receptionist greeted me with a polite smile that couldn't hide her curiosity. She'd seen enough family disputes to recognize the tension that came in pairs and trios. The conference room smelled faintly of lemon polish, the kind used to hide old wood and old arguments. My parents were already seated with Brooke between them, her mascara slightly smudged, as if she had practiced crying on the way. Beside her sat a woman in a red blazer, Denise Harper, the realtor. I recognized the type, confident, efficient, and ready to make a sale. Dad spoke first, his tone brisk and businesslike. Let's make this quick. Denise has buyers lined up, cash offers. He slid a folder across the table as if we were closing a deal instead of dissecting our family. Mom nodded toward me, that rehearsed mixture of patience and pity on her face. Hannah, honey, it's time to think about what Grandma would have wanted. This house is a big responsibility, and you already have your own place. I took a seat opposite them, laying my folder neatly on the table but keeping it closed. Grandma wanted me to have the house, I said. That's what her will states. Brooke dabbed her eyes with a tissue, her voice soft and wavering. We're not saying you should give it to me. But maybe we could share it or sell it and split it. Do what's fair. Fair. The word echoed in my head like an inside joke no one else got. I glanced at Claire, who kept her expression professional, though I saw her fingers tighten slightly around her pen. The will is legally binding, she said. There's no requirement to sell or share. Dad cut her off with the same authority he used when I was 10, and he told me my opinions were back talk. Wills can be contested, Claire. We've spoken to attorneys. There's something called undue influence. Maggie wasn't thinking clearly at her age. I looked at him calm on the outside, but my pulse was steady and deliberate, like counting steps in a hallway. She had full evaluations before signing. You know that. Mom leaned forward, lowering her voice into that measured tone that always came right before she said something cruel. We're trying to keep this from becoming ugly, Hannah. Don't force our hand. Denise slid a second set of papers toward me. This is an exceptional offer, she said, all business now. The market is hot. If we list today, it'll close within a week. You'd each walk away with enough for a new start. I didn't look at the papers. I'd already seen enough numbers in my life to know how easily money could be used as a leash. My father's voice sharpened. If you don't sign, you're out. No more holidays, no contact, nothing. We're done pretending. For a long moment the room was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning. Then I said, You've made that threat before. Mom straightened, startled by my tone. We're your parents. We've done everything for you. You've done everything for Brooke, I said evenly. There's a difference. Brooke gasped, her eyes wide as if I'd cursed in church. That's not fair, she whispered. You always think you're the victim. I almost smiled. I'm not the victim, Brooke. I'm the one who stopped volunteering for the role. Claire's voice broke through before anyone could answer. Perhaps we should take a short break. But Dad pushed back his chair. No, she'll sign today. That's when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced down, saw a name that made me catch my breath. Ethan Ward. I didn't open the message, not yet, but something in me shifted. I met my father's eyes, steady as stone. Actually, I said quietly, there's something you should know. He folded his arms. The only thing I need to hear is that you're signing. Not today, I said. Not ever. Mom's voice rose, breaking through the polished room like a siren. Do you want to destroy this family? Your sister needs that house. Her job depends on it. She already has a job, I replied, one that pays her well enough to rent her own place. Brooke's tears came faster now, the kind that draw sympathy even when they're rehearsed. You're being cruel. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The CEO expects me to host clients. How am I supposed to do that in a one-bedroom apartment? The irony almost made me laugh, but I didn't. I kept my expression calm the way Maggie taught me when she said never to show your next move. Denise tapped the papers again, trying to pull the meeting back on track. If you list now, I can have an open house by Sunday. We already have serious buyers interested. Claire spoke up, her voice steady but firm. Hannah hasn't agreed to sell. She will, Dad said, or she's out. I stood slowly collecting my folder. Then I guess I'm out. The silence that followed was thicker than anything I'd felt in years. Mom's eyes filled with something between fury and disbelief. Brooke's lips trembled as if she might scream. And Dad, he just stared unblinking, as if I'd turned into someone he didn't recognize. I think we're done here, I said softly. Claire rose with me. I'll walk you out. In the hallway, the air felt cooler, cleaner. I finally opened Ethan's message. Heard you might be selling a property on Maple Street. Interested. Can we talk? A small breath left my chest, half laugh, half relief. Of all the people to reach out, it had to be him. The same Ethan who'd once studied with me in college libraries until midnight, who'd sent a card when Maggie passed even though we hadn't spoken in years. And now he was the CEO of the company where Brooke worked. The universe had a strange sense of humor. That night I sat at my kitchen table with the phone pressed between my hands. My parents' ultimatum replayed in my mind, but underneath it was Maggie's voice from long ago. Patience isn't weakness, Hannah. It's preparation. I called Ethan. He answered on the second ring, his tone easy but direct. Still the same number. I figured you'd changed it after college. I kept it, I said. Old habits die hard. He didn't waste time. I'm serious about that property. I've been looking for a location like that, something close to our main campus. We can talk numbers, but it'd have to be confidential for now. Confidential. The words settled neatly in the space my family had tried to fill with guilt. I can do that, I said. Ethan's voice softened just a little. I remember how they treated you back then. This time you set the terms. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet for a long while, the hum of the refrigerator filling the room. The next few days would decide everything who I was to them and who I was to myself. By the time Friday turned into Saturday, my decision was made. The house was mine legally and morally, but holding it meant more than just keeping a roof. It meant keeping the one thing that had never been taken from me, my right to choose. When I drove past the Maple Street house the next morning, the sun was rising over the porch, washing the windows in gold. The roses Maggie planted were opening one by one. I parked at the curb and watched for a long time, knowing this would be the last time I'd see it empty. The papers would be signed within days, quietly and completely. My parents would still think they had time to corner me, and when they did, they'd find a door already closed. I started the car, the steering wheel warm under my hands, and smiled at the thought. The real meeting hadn't even begun yet. By Monday morning, my parents' silence had turned into something heavier. It wasn't the kind of quiet that came from understanding, it was the stillness before a storm. I woke to a dozen missed calls, 3 from my mother, 2 from Brooke, and the rest from numbers I didn't recognize. Every message carried the same rhythm, "Call us back. This can still be fixed." The word fixed hung in my mind as I made coffee, the kind of fix that usually meant undoing something that made them uncomfortable. At work, the numbers on my monitor blurred as my phone kept buzzing. I turned it face down and forced myself to focus on the spreadsheets, but the tightness in my chest refused to ease. When I left the office, I checked my messages out of habit. My mother's voice trembled, rehearsed, but still sharp. "Hannah, we're worried. Don't do anything rash. Think about your sister. Think about what Grandma would want." Then Brooke's message followed quieter, almost pleading. "I didn't mean for things to get this tense. Can we just talk before Thursday?" Thursday was the date they'd chosen for the family resolution meeting. I hadn't agreed to it, but I knew they'd hold it with or without me, and I'd already made sure that whatever they planned couldn't touch me anymore. That night, Ethan called. "We're ready. he said simply. His voice carried the same calm assurance he'd had in college when he'd explain a complex equation like, it was nothing. Contracts signed, recorded everything above board. I could hear the faint hum of city noise behind him. You'll get the full confirmation from your attorney by morning. Thank you, I said. The words felt small compared to the weight of what that house meant. Ethan hesitated before ending the call. They'll find out soon, won't they? They always do, I said quietly. By Wednesday, the messages had shifted in tone. My father's texts were clipped and cold. You're making a mistake. You'll regret this. My mother sent one final message that morning. We expect you at Claire's office tomorrow at 2. Bring your keys. When I pulled up outside the building the next day, their cars were already there. The same polished black sedan, the same blue SUV Brooke loved to brag about. I took a slow breath before stepping out. Inside the conference room, the tension was already thick. Mom's smile was tight, her lipstick a shade too bright. Dad sat at the head of the table like he owned the place. Brooke sat beside him, tissues ready in her lap. Claire was at the far end, papers, neatly arranged, her expression unreadable. And Denise, the realtor, was back flipping through property documents as if this were any ordinary sale. Dad started before I even sat down. We've brought a buyer who's ready to move fast. This can all be handled within the week if you just cooperate. I'm not selling, I said steady. His hand hit the table, the sound sharp enough to make Brooke jump. You are. You just don't realize it yet. Mom's tone softened the way it always did before she said something cruel. Your sister needs stability, Hannah. Her new position requires hosting clients' dinners, events. This isn't just about property, it's about family image. Family image, I repeated. Whose image exactly? Brooke sniffled, dabbing her eyes. You don't have to make this harder than it already is. I'm not trying to take it from you. We can share. You can't share a deed, I said. Denise slid a paper toward me, her nails tapping against the polished wood. This offer is generous, above market value. You'd each walk away with plenty. Each I asked. It's not yours to split. Dad leaned forward, voice lowering. If you keep pushing this, you'll regret it. No more family ties, no more support. You'll be cut off for good. I glanced at Claire, who looked ready to intervene, but I raised a hand slightly. It's fine, I said. I've heard this before. Mom's eyes narrowed. You really want to humiliate your own family over a house? I stood, smoothing the edge of my sleeve. If it's humiliation you're worried about, you should probably see what you're so desperate to take. Why don't we go to the house? All of us. It'll be easier to talk there. The words hung in the air for a moment before Dad said, Fine. If that's what it takes to make you understand. The drive to Maple Street felt longer than usual. The clouds had gathered low, gray, and heavy, and by the time we turned onto the familiar block, the light had gone flat and cool. I pulled up behind their cars the same way I had a dozen times as a child when we'd visit Maggie on Sundays. But this time, everything felt different. Brooke was the first to notice the unfamiliar car in the driveway, a white Tesla gleaming beneath the oak tree, its windows tinted dark. She frowned. Who's here? Dad stepped out of the sedan, his expression tightening. Probably one of the neighbors. Don't worry about it. But Mom was already scanning the porch. That's odd, she said. The door's open. I walked ahead of them up the front steps, my hand resting lightly on the railing that Maggie had painted pale blue one summer. When I reached the porch, the door opened fully, and there he was. Ethan stood in the doorway, dressed in a crisp gray shirt and jeans, the kind of effortless polish that comes from confidence, not money. You must be the Sullivans, he said pleasantly. Brooke froze where she stood, her face draining of color. Mr. Ward? She stammered. What are you doing here? Ethan smiled, not unkindly. Checking on my new property. The silence that followed was absolute. Dad blinked first. Your property? I stepped forward, stopping beside Ethan. The house was sold 3 days ago, fully recorded and cleared. Claire arrived moments later, papers in hand. It's true, she said. I've reviewed the documents myself. Mom's voice cracked as she turned to me. You sold it to him. Your sister's boss. Ethan nodded once. Technically to my investment company, all perfectly legal. Dad's face turned red. "You can't do this. We had buyers lined up. You had offers," I said evenly, "but no ownership." Denise muttered something about needing to make a call and slipped away toward her car. Mom's hands trembled. "We're your family, Hannah. You had no right." Ethan's voice remained calm, almost detached. Actually, she had every right. The property was hers to sell. It was a fair market transaction. Brooke's eyes filled with tears again. "This isn't fair," she whispered. "You knew I worked for him." Ethan met her gaze. "That's true. Which is why you'll be interested to know we're opening a satellite office here. Your department, specifically." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Here, you mean this house?" Ethan nodded. "It's a perfect location. Comfortable, central, and within company budget." Dad's voice thundered. "You manipulated my daughter. This is a setup." Ethan's expression didn't change. "I paid above asking. If anyone was taken advantage of, it was me. But I like the property. It suits our needs." Mom tried to move past me, but I stepped aside just enough for her to stop short. "Don't," I said quietly. Her voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "You've ruined us. You've ruined your sister." "No," I said. "You did that when you decided her comfort mattered more than my rights." Neighbors had started gathering on the sidewalk, drawn by the raised voices. Mary Alvarez stood near the gate, shaking her head. Claire's tone turned official. "The sale is finalized. Any attempt to contest will fail." Maggie's will was airtight. Mom's hand flew to her mouth, her voice breaking. "She turned your grandmother against us. No Mary called from the curb. Your mother saw exactly who you were." The sound of murmurs rippled through the small crowd, a mix of disbelief and quiet satisfaction. I stood on the porch, the cool air brushing against my arms, and for the first time in a long while, I felt still. Ethan turned toward me. "You should probably tell them the rest," he said softly. I looked at Brooke, who could barely meet my eyes. "I'm staying," I said. "There's a lease in place, 10 years below market rate. I'll be living upstairs." Brooke took a step back, shaking her head. "You can't be serious." "Completely," I said. The crowd had gone quiet now, the kind of hush that comes when people realize they're witnessing the end of something. My mother's voice broke the silence, low and furious. "You'll regret this, Hannah." I looked past her toward the roses blooming along the walkway. Maybe I said, "But not today." The weight of their stares followed me as I turned toward the open doorway. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paint and coffee. The home Maggie left behind had changed hands, but not its purpose. It had always been a place where truth eventually came out. As I stepped over the threshold, I could hear Brooke whisper to our mother, her voice trembling, "What are we supposed to do now?" And my mother's answer, brittle and small, "We wait. She can't win forever." But standing there in the doorway of what was once my grandmother's kitchen, I already knew they were wrong. The next morning would bring fallout calls, posts, whispers, but for now all that mattered was the quiet hum of justice settling into the walls. The next morning, the news of what happened on Maple Street had already begun to ripple through our family. My phone lit up before sunrise with messages ranging from outrage to disbelief. Aunt Janet texted first, followed by a cousin I hadn't heard from in years. Each message carried the same tone shock, disguised as concern. By noon, it wasn't just my relatives. My coworkers were whispering in the hallway after one of them spotted a neighbor's video online. In it, you could see my parents shouting on the porch, Brooke crying, and Ethan calmly explaining the legalities. The clip had spread faster than any of us expected. I spent the day at work trying to focus, but the events kept replaying in my mind. Every word from my mother, every glance from my father. They had walked into that confrontation certain of their victory. They'd brought a realtor, an audience, and a script. Instead, they walked out of the house as spectators to their own undoing. Still, the weight of what happened hadn't settled completely. It lingered just behind my ribs, an ache that came with realizing justice sometimes feels as heavy as wrongdoing. When I got home that evening, Ethan was standing on the porch with 2 cups of coffee. "You made quite an impression," he said with a faint smile. "The neighbors think we're filming a drama series." I took the cup he offered and leaned against the railing. The garden below was quiet, the roses opening wider than they had in weeks. I didn't expect it to spread that fast, I said. Neither did they, he replied, nodding toward the street. But maybe that's the point. The truth tends to echo louder than lies. We talked for a few minutes about logistics paperwork, the start date for renovations, the delivery of office furniture. Then Ethan's tone softened. I know yesterday wasn't easy, he said, but you handled it better than most would. I didn't answer right away. Somewhere inside me, the part that had always tried to fix things wanted to believe there was still room for understanding. But that door had closed long before the sale was finalized. By the weekend, the transformation began. Movers arrived early Saturday morning carrying in desks, chairs, and equipment for the new satellite office. The sound of hammers and laughter mixed with the hum of passing cars. Mary Alvarez stopped by with her terrier Daisy and watched from the sidewalk. Your grandmother would be proud, she said softly. She always said this house would stand for something one day. I thanked her, and we stood together for a while, watching the garden sway under the early spring sun. Later that afternoon, Brooke's car appeared at the curb. She stepped out slowly, sunglasses covering most of her face. For a moment, she just stood there staring at the new sign that had been placed near the gate Ward Innovations Marketing Division. Her jaw tightened. I walked down the steps. You could have called, I said. She didn't look at me. I wanted to see it for myself, she replied. You really went through with it. It's done, I said quietly. The sale's complete. I live upstairs now. Brooke's voice trembled, though she tried to steady it. He's my boss, Hannah. Do you understand what this means for me? I nodded. I do, but this wasn't about you losing anything. It was about me keeping what was mine. She looked away toward the porch where Ethan stood speaking with one of the movers. He's making me work here, isn't he? She said, almost to herself. This is his way of punishing me. That's between you and him, I said. I didn't ask for that arrangement. Brooke's expression hardened. You could have stopped this. I met her eyes, calm but tired. So could you. The following Monday, the office officially opened. Company cars began pulling up around 8:30. I watched from the upstairs window as Brooke arrived just before 9, clutching her laptop bag and wearing a strained smile. She walked past the roses without looking up, her heels clicking sharply against the walkway. Through the open window, I could hear bits of conversation, introductions, laughter, the sound of furniture being moved. Then a familiar voice called out, Brooke, can you join us in the front room? We're reviewing campaign materials. It was Laura Price, her department head, cheerful but firm. Brooke's reply was barely audible. Coming. By mid-afternoon, the house that once held quiet conversations and the scent of baked apples now buzzed with meetings and the rhythm of new beginnings. I stayed upstairs working from my small office, letting the distant noise of activity become background music. Occasionally, I'd hear laughter or the shuffle of papers. Other times, silence. Around 5:30, I stepped outside to water the garden. Brooke passed by me on her way to her car, her face pale. This isn't sustainable, she said under her breath. I can't work like this. I turned off the hose. Then talk to your manager, I said. That's what employees do. That night, I sat in the kitchen with the old clock ticking above the stove. It struck me how quickly everything had changed, how easily people rebuild around the truth once it's spoken aloud. Ethan called just before 9. How's the first day, he asked. Quiet up here, I said. Busy down there. I could hear a smile in his voice. That's how it should be. In the days that followed, the story spread beyond our neighborhood. Friends texted asking if the rumors were true. Some called it poetic justice. Others called it cruel. I answered none of them. My focus stayed on the numbers in front of me. Budgets, invoices, reports. The kind of certainty that doesn't depend on anyone's approval. Brooke's messages when they came were brief. A request to move her car, a notice about upcoming maintenance, nothing personal. The silence between us grew measured but complete. One evening as I was locking the front gate, Mary Alvarez came by again. She handed me a small envelope. Found this in my old mailbox, she said. Looks like your grandmother's handwriting. Inside was a note dated 3 years before Maggie passed. If you ever have to choose between peace and acceptance, pick peace. Acceptance will come later, and if it doesn't, you won't need it. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my pocket. The following week, Claire called to check in. "Your parents have been asking about contesting the will again," she said. "I told them it's pointless, but you should know they're reaching out to other firms." I thanked her and asked if there was anything I needed to do. "No," she said. "Everything is airtight." Maggie saw to that. She paused, her voice softening. "You should start living again, Hannah. You've already won." That night, I stood by the bay window watching the lights from downtown flicker in the distance. Downstairs, the office had gone dark, the team long gone for the day. The house was quiet again, though different now, a mix of past and present, of what was taken and what was reclaimed. I thought of my parents somewhere across town, still trying to rewrite a story that was already finished, and of Brooke caught between two worlds of her own making. When I turned to head upstairs, my phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Ethan team, dinner tomorrow at 6. "We'd love for you to join us." I hesitated, then typed back, "We'll see." The garden light flicked on automatically, bathing the roses in a soft glow. Somewhere in that small corner of the world, the air finally felt still again. But calm never lasts long in a family like mine. The next morning, a message from my mother waited in my inbox, short-clipped and heavy with implication. "Your sister can't take this anymore. We need to talk." And just like that, the quiet began to shift once more. My mother's message arrived just after sunrise. The subject line said, "Only urgent." The email beneath it was short and clipped, the kind she wrote when she'd already made up her mind. "Your sister can't take this anymore. You've made your point. Meet us at the house today at 4. There was no greeting, no signature, just that familiar tone that always sounded like an order wrapped in concern. I read it twice, then shut the laptop. By the time I got home that afternoon, the house on Maple Street looked different. The company cars were gone, the yard quiet except for the low buzz of cicadas. For the first time in weeks, there was no movement behind the downstairs windows. I walked through the gate and noticed the faint scent of rain in the air, the kind that hangs before a summer storm. My parents' sedan was parked crooked along the curb, as if they'd arrived in a rush. Inside, I found them standing in the living room, Mom pacing near the fireplace, Dad planted beside her, arms folded. Brooke sat on the edge of the couch, pale and motionless, a folder resting on her knees. The tension in the room was thick enough to taste. Mom looked up first. "We need to talk about what you've done," she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed. "I didn't do anything I said. You asked me to come, so talk." Dad stepped forward. "Your sister's been under unbearable stress. Working in this house, your house has humiliated her. She's barely sleeping. You've made your point. Now it's time to undo it." Brooke didn't look at me. She stared down at her hands, twisting a tissue until it tore. "I can't walk into that office anymore," she said softly. "Everyone looks at me like I'm the villain." "You created that image yourself," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I didn't tell anyone what happened. People saw it on their own." Mom turned sharply. "Don't act like you're innocent. You could have stopped this spectacle before it started. Instead, you sold this house to your sister's boss just to humiliate us." "That sale was business," I said, "and perfectly legal." Dad's face reddened. "Legal doesn't make it right." For a long moment, no one spoke. The clock above the mantel ticked loudly, marking every second of the silence. Finally, Brooke stood. "I just want to move past this," she said. "If you'd sell the house back, maybe we could." I looked at her. "Sell it back to who? Us?" She said quickly. "We'll buy it. We've been talking to a bank about financing." "You mean Mom and Dad have," I said. "Not you." The color drained from her face, and I knew I'd hit the truth. Mom crossed her arms. "We're offering double what that man paid. Surely even you can see reason." Before I could answer, a knock came at the open front door. Ethan stepped inside holding a thick envelope. His presence changed the air in the room instantly. My father stiffened. Brooke froze. "Afternoon." Ethan said, his tone calm but firm. "Sorry to interrupt, but I thought it would be best to bring these in person." He set the envelope on the coffee table. "Maintenance invoices and the quarterly lease summary. Everything's itemized." Dad glared at him. "You have some nerve showing up here after what you pulled." Ethan didn't flinch. "Mr. Sullivan, I purchased this property through proper channels. Your daughter sold it willingly. The paperwork is public record. Mom's voice rose. You manipulated her. Ethan looked at me briefly before replying. Your daughter is an accountant. I doubt anyone manipulates her without a calculator and a contract. For the first time, Dad's confidence faltered. We'll sue. Undue influence. Fraud. Something. Ethan folded his hands calmly. You can try, but you'll lose. The sale is recorded funded and closed. I suggest you stop before you make this worse. Mom's expression hardened, but she said nothing. Brooke sank back onto the couch, covering her face. I could see her shoulders trembling. Ethan turned to me. I'll leave you to it, he said quietly. Just thought you should have those. As he reached the doorway, my mother snapped, Don't think this is over. He paused, glanced over his shoulder, and said evenly, It already is. Then he was gone. The room stayed silent for several seconds after the sound of his car faded down the street. Mom's voice broke first. You see what you've brought into this family, strangers? Lawsuits. Scandal. I took a breath. What I brought was independence, something this family never allowed. Dad stepped closer, his voice low. You think you've won, don't you? You think money makes you better than us? No, I said, but it stops you from owning me. That landed harder than I expected. For the first time in years, neither of them had a response ready. Brooke finally looked up, her eyes red. You could help me, you know. You have the power to fix this. I can't fix what isn't broken, I said softly. You still have a job, a roof, a choice. Her voice cracked. I'm drowning, Hannah. You'll learn to swim, I said. Mom gasped, her hand clutching her chest as if I'd struck her. You've become heartless. I shook my head. No, I've just stopped volunteering to drown alongside you. The storm outside broke, then rain pelting against the windows, thunder rolling in the distance. My father turned away first, muttering under his breath as he grabbed his coat. We're done here. He walked out the door without looking back. Mom followed, stopping long enough to say, You'll regret this when you're alone. When the sound of their car finally faded, the house felt still again, like it had returned to its own rhythm. Brooke stayed on the couch, her shoulders hunched. For a moment, I almost said something comforting, something that might soften the edges between us, but then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. He's putting me on probation. Ethan. For underperforming. Do you know what that means for me? Yes, I said quietly. It means you'll finally have to earn what you've been given. She looked up sharply. You're enjoying this. I shook my head. No, Brooke, I'm surviving it. She stood, abruptly gathered her things, and left without another word. The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the room. The next few days passed in a strange calm. The office continued to operate downstairs, though I noticed Brooke stopped coming as often. Laura Price took over most of her responsibilities. Ethan called midweek to update me on some property repairs. She's struggling, he said quietly, but we're handling it professionally. I know, I replied. Thank you. That Friday, Mary Alvarez stopped by with a basket of lemons from her tree. Your folks have been making quite the scene, she said gently. They've been talking about moving. Somewhere quiet. I'm not surprised, I said, taking the basket. She gave me a long look. You did what needed to be done. But it's never easy being the one who does it. That night, I walked through the house room by room, turning off the lights one by one. The walls still held the faint smell of new paint, mixed with something older, Maggie's lavender polish maybe. Outside the garden glistened from the rain, each rose heavy with water. The house was peaceful again, but beneath that peace was a hint of something else, a storm still moving on the horizon. As I closed the front door, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Claire Benton. Call me in the morning. Your parents have filed an intent to contest the sale. I set the phone down on the table and looked around the quiet room. The air felt still, but I knew better now. In my family, calm never meant the conflict was over. It only meant the next round was about to begin. The next morning, I called Claire as soon as the sun came up. She answered on the second ring, her voice calm but clipped the way she always sounded before delivering bad news. They've filed the paperwork, she said, intent to contest the sale and challenge the will. I I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the small crack in the tile that Maggie had once tried to patch with clear sealant. "On what grounds?" I asked. "Undue influence," she said flatly. "They're claiming you manipulated your grandmother in her final year." I didn't speak for a moment. The accusation wasn't new, it had always been the threat that hovered whenever my parents didn't get their way. Still hearing it in legal terms sent a hollow ache through my chest. Claire continued, "I'll file our response today. There's no evidence to support their claim, and the medical evaluations alone will end this before it starts." She paused. "But be prepared. They'll use this as leverage before they back down. Meaning what? Meaning they'll try to make your life uncomfortable until they realize they've lost," she said. That prediction turned out to be an understatement. Within days, word of the family dispute began to circle through mutual acquaintances, neighbors, and even old co-workers. At the grocery store, a woman I vaguely recognized from church stopped me near the produce aisle. "Such a shame about your parents," she said quietly. "Families shouldn't fight over money." I wanted to tell her it wasn't about money at all, but I just nodded and moved on. Downstairs, the marketing team carried on as if nothing had happened. Ethan had increased security around the property, both for company protocol and to keep the peace. Brooke, however, was unraveling. She'd been written up twice in a week for missing deadlines and skipping team meetings. I could hear her muffled phone calls through the vents, long conversations with our mother that always ended in tears. The distance between us was measured in both floors and silence. One evening after the last of the employees left, I went downstairs to lock up. Brooke was still there, sitting in what used to be Maggie's reading room, her desk littered with half-finished reports. Her hair was pulled back loosely, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked up when I entered. "I'm getting fired," she said flatly. I leaned against the doorframe. "What happened?" "I missed another client review. Laura's been reporting everything to Ethan. He says I'm distracted, that I can't separate personal from professional." She let out a bitter laugh. "How am I supposed to—" "My family's been turned into a company scandal." I didn't answer right away. "You could talk to HR, I said finally. "Ask for a transfer." Brooke shook her head. "They offered. But a transfer's a demotion. I'd lose the title, the pay, everything." She looked up at me. "You wanted this, didn't you? You wanted me to fall apart so you could feel superior." "That's not what I wanted," I said quietly. "I wanted boundaries." Her expression hardened. "You call this boundaries, living upstairs while I lose everything below. You've trapped me in a nightmare." Before I could respond, she gathered her things and stormed past me. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the picture frames on the wall. Later that night, Ethan called. "She's struggling," he said simply. "We've tried to support her, but she's refusing help. I think your parents are feeding the fire." "I know," I said. "Claire's handling their claim. It won't go anywhere." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "She's talented when she's focused, but right now it's like she's trying to prove something impossible." "That's been her way since we were kids," I said. "Then I suppose she learned from the best," he replied gently. The following week, Claire called with an update. "Their case is collapsing," she said. "The physician statements from your grandmother's last year are airtight. Both doctors verified she was fully lucid when the will was signed. I've already requested dismissal." Relief washed through me, but it came mixed with exhaustion. "So that's it." "Almost," she said. "There's one more hearing for formality's sake, but they'll lose. The court will issue confirmation within 10 days. 10 days stretched longer than I expected. My parents continued to call, leaving voicemails about family reconciliation and one last chance to make things right. I ignored them. Brooke stopped showing up entirely. The office downstairs ran quietly under Laura's supervision, and the house fell back into uneasy calm. On the 9th day, I came home from work to find my parents' car parked across the street. They were standing by the garden gate, arguing in low, sharp voices. When they saw me, Mom straightened immediately, her expression smoothing into something almost gentle. "Hannah, we just want to talk," she said. I stayed on the sidewalk. "About what Dad stepped forward. Your sister's lost her job. She's devastated. You've made your point, and now it's time to show some compassion." "I didn't fire her," I said. Mom's eyes glistened. "She can't even leave the apartment. She says you broke her. She needs help. She needs accountability," I said softly. Dad's tone hardened. "You think you're better than us, but you're not." All this money, this house, it's made you cold." I met his gaze. "No, it's made me free." For a moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the trees. Then Mom said, "You'll regret this when you have no one left." I turned toward the house. I already had no one left. This just made it official. They didn't follow me up the path. When I closed the door behind me, I could still hear their voices faintly through the window, Mom crying, Dad muttering curses under his breath. The next morning, Claire called again. "The court dismissed their claim," she said. "It's over." I thanked her and hung up. The house felt different that day, lighter somehow, as if the air itself had exhaled. Downstairs, Laura gathered the team for a quick meeting. I could hear her voice carry up the staircase, warm and confident. They were talking about moving the department to a larger space by fall. The sound filled the house like a quiet victory. That evening, I found an envelope slipped under my door. Brooke's handwriting was unmistakable. Inside was a short note. "You won. I hope it was worth it." There was no return address, no number. Just that single line. I folded the note and set it on the counter, unsure what to feel anymore. Later, Ethan stopped by to drop off the final maintenance report. As he stood by the doorway, he looked at me carefully. "Your family's moving," he said. "They told HR they're relocating to Arizona. A fresh start, apparently." I nodded. "That sounds like them." He hesitated. "You're all right." I looked around the quiet house. The walls, the garden outside the porch, light glowing softly against the evening. "I think I will be," I said. The air outside was still warm when Ethan left. I sat on the porch long after his car disappeared, listening to the crickets. For the first time in years, there was no shouting, no pleading, no bargaining for peace that never came. Just quiet. But peace has a way of revealing what's been buried beneath it. That night, as I walked through the house, I opened one of Maggie's old drawers and found something tucked in the back, a stack of unsent letters written in her looping script. The top one was addressed to me. I unfolded it carefully, and the first line stopped me cold. "If you're reading this, the garden is yours now. Let it remind you that love, when tended properly, always grows back." I read the rest slowly, the words steady and sure, like the woman who wrote them. By the time I reached the end, the storm that had followed me for so long finally began to ease. Still, I knew the story wasn't quite done. Brooke was gone, my parents were leaving, but something in me understood there was one more chapter to face before the past could truly rest. The letter from Maggie stayed on my desk for days. I read it each night before bed, tracing the loops of her handwriting with my thumb until the ink almost felt warm. Her words had a way of quieting everything, the noise, the doubt, the ache that came from standing alone too long. But peace never lasts forever. By the end of the week, Ethan stopped by with a somber look that told me something had shifted again. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You might want to sit down," he said. "There's been an incident." I motioned for him to come in. He set his phone on the table and pressed play on a video that was already halfway through. The screen showed Brooke in the office lobby, her voice raised, words spilling out fast and sharp. "She ruined me. She stole everything that was supposed to be mine." Her hands trembled. Papers scattered at her feet. Coworkers watching in silence. Security approached, seconds later gently leading her toward the door as she broke down sobbing. Ethan stopped the video. "She showed up this morning demanding her job back," he said quietly. "When we explained the termination terms, she lost control. HR had to escort her out." For a moment, all I could do was listen to the faint hum of the refrigerator behind us. "Is she all right?" I asked finally. "She will be," he said. "We called her a car and made sure she got home. But there's something else." He handed me an envelope with my name scrawled across the front. "She dropped this off before she left. Said it was for you." Inside was a single folded page. "You've destroyed everything. I don't know who I am without them, without the life they built around me. You call it freedom, but all I see is loss." I read it twice before setting it down. The words weren't angry so much as hollow, like she'd run out of ways to fight. Ethan studied my face. "I didn't show you that to hurt you," he said softly. "But you deserve to know what's happening." "I know," I said. "Thank you for handling it." He hesitated, as if he wanted to say more, then simply nodded and left. That night I sat by the window with the letter still in my lap. The garden below shimmered under the porch light, the roses glistening after a brief rain. I thought about Maggie's line, "Love, when tended properly, always grows back." Maybe this was what she meant, that healing sometimes grows where love once failed. The following days brought a strange calm. My parents stopped calling altogether, their move to Arizona confirmed through distant relatives. The house filled with light again, the noise of the past slowly dissolving into memory. Downstairs, Ethan's team began packing up. The office expansion had been approved, and they'd be relocating to a larger building across town. On their last afternoon in the house, Laura stopped by my door before heading out. "You've got a good thing here," she said, glancing around the bright kitchen. "Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for keeping it." I smiled and thanked her, and she left with the last of the team. When the trucks finally pulled away, the house was quiet again, so quiet I could hear the old pipes breathe. I walked through each room, touching the door frames, the shelves, the worn edge of the banister where Maggie's handprint still faintly showed in the varnish. For the first time, it truly felt like mine. 2 weeks later, Claire called with one final update. "The court has closed the case permanently," she said. "No appeals, no liens. Everything stands exactly as it should." "That's the best news I've had in years," I said. "I thought you'd like that," she replied. Then, after a pause, "You've been remarkably composed through all this. Most people would have cracked by now." "I think I did," I said quietly. "Just not in front of anyone." She chuckled softly. "Well, you held it together long enough to win." After we hung up, I took a long walk through the neighborhood. The summer air had turned soft and golden, the kind that smells faintly of cut grass and rain-soaked concrete. When I returned, a car I didn't recognize was parked out front, a small silver sedan with Brooks' old university decal in the back window. She was sitting inside, staring at the porch. I hesitated before approaching. She saw me and stepped out. Her shoulders hunched, a faint nervousness in her movements. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Of course," I said. We sat on the porch steps, the air thick with humidity. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Brooke sighed, her voice barely a whisper. "I lost the apartment. I've been staying with a friend from work, but it's not going to last. I just didn't know where else to go." I nodded. "You're not here to ask for money, are you?" "No," she said quickly. "I know better than that now." She paused, eyes fixed on the roses. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry. Not for everything, I'm not sure I understand everything yet, but for the way I treated you, for believing what they said about you, for letting them make me small just to keep their approval." Her words caught me off guard. "That took a lot to admit," I said. She shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I just ran out of ways to blame everyone else." We sat quietly for a while, the evening settling around us. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small tin box. "These were Grandma's," she said. "Mom packed them by accident when they moved. I thought you should have them." Inside were Maggie's old recipe cards, lemon bars, chicken pot pie, the chocolate cookies she used to bake on weekends. The handwriting was faded, but familiar. I smiled despite the ache that rose in my throat. "Thank you," I said. Brooke stood brushing off her jeans. "I should go," she said softly. "I just wanted to return those. You can stay for dinner if you'd like," I offered. She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not tonight, but maybe sometime soon." I nodded, and she gave a small, genuine smile before walking back to her car. As she drove away, I looked down at the tin box in my hands. The garden rustled softly in the breeze, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to forgiveness, not perfect, not complete, but enough to start rebuilding. Later that evening, Ethan called to check in. "I heard Brooke stopped by," he said. "How'd it go?" "She's trying," I said. "That's a start." He paused. "Good. You've both been through enough." We talked for a few more minutes before saying goodnight. After I hung up, I set the recipe box on the counter and opened the window above the sink. The scent of roses drifted in, mingling with the faint smell of rain from earlier. The house felt lighter somehow, like it had finally found its balance. But deep down I knew one last moment still waited ahead, the kind that settles everything for good, the kind that closes the story not with anger, but with peace. And though I didn't know what form it would take yet, I could feel it coming quiet and certain, like the first light of morning breaking through after a long storm. The morning after Brooke's visit, I woke early to the sound of rain tapping against the windows. The air smelled like wet earth and roses, the same scent that always filled the garden after a storm. I walked outside barefoot, the grass cool beneath my feet, and watched water slide off the petals Maggie had once planted with her own hands. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to brace myself for another argument or accusation. The silence was peaceful, not empty. Later that week, I received an envelope from Claire. Inside was the final deed transfer, confirming what she called the end of all disputes. Along with it was a small note written in her neat slanted handwriting. "Freedom sometimes looks like stillness. Enjoy it." I set the papers in the old cedar drawer where Maggie used to keep her gardening gloves. It felt right leaving them there tucked among things that had grown from both love and effort. The following Sunday, I hosted a small dinner for the neighbors who had stood by me through the chaos. Mary brought her lemon pound cake still warm from the oven, and we ate in the backyard under strings of soft light. The talk was easy stories about Maggie, updates on everyone's family's laughter that didn't carry the tension of pity or gossip. When the night grew quiet, Mary touched my hand and said, "You know she'd be proud, not because you won, but because you stayed true." I didn't have to ask who she meant. Over the next few months, life fell into a gentle rhythm. My work flourished again, free from distraction. Ethan's company completed their move downtown, but he stopped by now and then to check on the property or just share coffee on the porch. Those visits became small rituals, talking about the garden, the business, sometimes about nothing at all. He once said, "It's strange how peace takes longer to get used to than conflict." He was right. Brooke reached out again about a month later. She'd taken an entry-level job at a smaller firm in the city. Her voice over the phone sounded steadier, even hopeful. "It's not glamorous," she said, "but it's mine." We talked for nearly an hour, not as rivals, not as strangers, just sisters, finally speaking without a script written by our parents. Before hanging up, she added quietly, "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I deserved it." I told her the truth. We both had to learn when to stop fighting and start living. By autumn, the house had fully become my own. I refinished the porch swing, replaced the shutters, and rebuilt Maggie's old herb garden beside the fence. Each task felt like a quiet act of rebuilding something Maggie would have called mending the soil before planting anew. Sometimes I caught myself humming while I worked, unaware, until the wind carried the tune away. The space that once felt heavy with ghosts now breathed with light. One afternoon, I discovered a final envelope tucked behind the family photo Maggie had framed years ago. Inside was her handwriting, again faded but firm. "Family is not who claims you," it read. "It's who stands beside you when you have nothing to offer but truth." I sat for a long time holding that note, realizing how right she'd been. I hadn't lost a family, I'd found the version of it that could finally be real. When winter came, I decided to dedicate the garden to her. A small bronze plaque now rests beneath the largest rose bush, engraved with her favorite words, "Love grows best where it's tended with honesty." The neighbors helped me place it there one crisp December afternoon, and we stood together as the first frost began to form on the petals. It felt like a benediction, not an ending, but a circle finally closing. Today the house hums with quiet life. Mornings start with coffee on the porch and end with soft light spilling through the kitchen window. The world outside still spins with its noise and demands, but here everything feels balanced. I've learned that peace isn't something you stumble upon. It's something you choose again and again, even when no one understands why. Sometimes Brooke visits for dinner. We talk about work, about the small apartment she's saving to buy, about the man she's been seeing. She still carries pieces of the girl who needed constant approval, but there's strength now too, earned, not given. When she leaves, she always hugs me twice, once as an apology, and once as a promise. I keep Maggie's letters in a wooden box on the mantel beside a small framed photo of her, standing in this same garden decades ago. Whenever life feels uncertain, I read her words again. They remind me that boundaries aren't walls, they're the fences that protect what grows inside. And so, after everything I've come to understand, the lesson Maggie meant to teach all along, justice doesn't always come from courtrooms or apologies. Sometimes it comes quietly through healing forgiveness and the courage to live life on your own terms. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to rebuild your peace after being told you didn't deserve it, know that you're not alone. Take care of your own garden, tend to your heart, and let what's meant to grow grow.